Welcome to the Day 3 notes for Chapter 8. Today we are going to be talking about the properties of rhombuses, rectangles, and squares. So we're going to use properties to classify special quadrilaterals. So we're going to learn all the properties of rhombuses, all the properties of rectangles, and all the properties of squares. So you should have your property card out and then also your notes. Okay, rhombus properties. A rhombus is a type of parallelogram. So it has all the same properties of a parallelogram. In addition, a rhombus has 4 congruent sides, its diagonals are perpendicular, and the diagonals bisect the opposite angles. Okay, so it's a parallelogram. That means opposite sides are parallel, opposite sides are congruent, and opposite angles are congruent. Okay, so far, those are all the markings of just a parallelogram. Okay, now, a rhombus has 4 congruent sides. So, all 4 of these sides have to be the same. The diagonals are perpendicular. And they bisect the opposite angles. So what that means is this angle A is bisected. This angle is bisected, etc. So those are the properties of a rhombus. So this is example 1. It says for rhombus QRST, decide whether the statement is always, sometimes, or never true. I'm going to suggest that you start out by drawing yourself a rhombus. Okay, and it says QRST. QRST. I'm not going to mark all the properties, but I am going to mark that all the sides are congruent, because that's what makes a rhombus a rhombus. Okay, angle Q being congruent to angle S. So are opposite angles always, sometimes, or never true in a rhombus? Well, this is always true in a parallelogram. A rhombus is a type of parallelogram, so this is always true. Now it says angle Q is congruent to angle R, always, sometimes, or never true. This is not necessarily true in a parallelogram. Consecutive angles are not always congruent, and it's not necessarily true in a rhombus. It could be true, so this is sometimes true. Okay, rectangle properties. A rectangle is also a parallelogram. So it has all the properties of a parallelogram. The opposite sides are parallel, the opposite sides are congruent, the opposite angles are congruent, the diagonals bisect each other, and then the consecutive angles are supplementary. In addition, a rectangle has 4 congruent angles, or 4 right angles, and the diagonals are congruent. So that diagonal is equal to that diagonal. Remember that because it's a parallelogram, the diagonals also bisect each other. So again, these properties should be in your notes and on your property card. Pause the video if you need more time. Okay, example number 2, I would like you to try this one. First, classify the triangle, and then find the values of x and y, please. Come back when you have finished. Okay, hopefully you had a chance to try this one on your own. Classify the quadrilateral. Well, we see that the quadrilateral has 4 right angles, so this must be a rectangle. Now we need to find the values of x and y. Well, a rectangle has the properties of a parallelogram, which means that the opposite sides are congruent. So my first equation is going to be 3x add 4 is equal to 4x subtract 5. If I add 5 to both sides, I get 3x add 9 is equal to 4x. Subtract 3x, and I get 9 is equal to x. So you should have gotten x equals 9. My second equation is 4y equals 6y subtract 10. I'm going to add 10 to both sides. Subtract 4y, I end up with 10 is equal to 2y. divided by 2, so y is equal to 5. That one should not have been too tricky, since we kind of did that with parallelograms. Okay, moving on. Quick little break for you. A dad and his son were riding their bikes and crashed. 2 ambulances came and took them to different hospitals. The man's son was in the operating room, and the doctor said, "I can't operate on you. You're my son." How is that possible? So think about that one. I'm not going to tell you in this video. I'll tell you in class, but hopefully you can come up with an answer. Okay, so far we've talked about rhombuses, we've talked about rectangles, so squares are what we have left. A square is a parallelogram. It's also a rhombus and a rectangle. So a square has all the properties of a parallelogram, all the properties of a rhombus, and all the properties of a rectangle. So 4 congruent sides, perpendicular diagonals. The diagonals bisect the opposite angles. It also has 4 right angles and congruent diagonals. That's a whole lot of properties. So right now you might want to pause the video, make sure you get all of those properties down on your property sheet. Okay, so here's our example number 3. It says name the quadrilateral, parallelogram, rhombus, rectangle, and or square. I'm going to do the first 2 with you. You're going to do the second 2 on your own. Okay, 4 congruent sides. That's a property of a rhombus. Now remember, squares have all the same properties as a rhombus. So if this describes a rhombus, it also describes a square. Okay, next one, congruent diagonals. Is this true of a parallelogram? No. Is it true of a rhombus? No. It is true of a rectangle. So this describes a rectangle. All the properties of a rectangle, a square also has. So this also describes a square. So you should see now, anytime you write down rhombus, you have to write down square. Anytime you write down rectangle, you have to write down square. Okay, pause the video. You try the next 2 on your own. Okay, diagonals bisect each other. This is true of a parallelogram. Now remember that rhombuses, rectangles, and squares have all the same properties as a parallelogram. So if I wrote down parallelogram, I also have to write down rhombus and rectangle and a square. Okay, the last one is the most difficult. Congruent and perpendicular diagonals. Starting with a parallelogram. Are the diagonals congruent? No, so it's not that. In a rhombus, are the diagonals congruent? No. In a rectangle, are they congruent? Yes. But are they also perpendicular? No. Now to a square. Are the diagonals congruent in a square? Yes, because that's a property of a rectangle. Are they perpendicular? Yes, that's a property of a rhombus. So this last property is only for squares. Squares have congruent and perpendicular diagonals. I know that was tricky, but hopefully that one went okay for us. Okay. Moving on to our last example today. Example number 4. Consider square ABCD. If AC equals 12, find the perimeter of ABCD. So I'm going to start by drawing myself a figure. Okay, so it says we have square ABCD. Now I'm going to start marking. I know a square has 4 congruent sides and 4 right angles. So right now this is a square. Okay, now it tells us AC is equal to 12. So that means this part here is 12. And we're asked to find the perimeter. Now we know all 4 sides are congruent, so I really just need to find one side. Now, let's look at this triangle right here, triangle ADC. We notice it has a right angle and congruent legs. Hopefully remember from this chapter, or from last chapter, that this is a 45, 45, 90 triangle. So these 2 angles are 45. Okay, remember under that we write L, L, L root 2. Now we know the side across from the 90 is 12. So under the 90, I'm just going to write 12. Plain old 12, not 12 or 2, just 12. I need to know my L's. So right now I have L root 2 is equal to 12. Divide by root 2, I get L is equal to 12 divided by root 2. Just leave it like that. Those are not like terms. I don't want a decimal. Just leave it as 12 over root 2. So that means each side of the square is 12 divided by root 2. Now in order to find the perimeter, I need to add up all 4 sides. So I have 4 sides. Each side is 12 divided by root 2. When I multiply 4 by 12, I get 48 divided by root 2. I'm just going to throw in the word units. So the perimeter of our square is 48 divided by root 2 units. This chapter, you're going to have to still remember the 45, 45, 90, 30, 60, 90, trig, Pythagorean theorem, all that stuff from chapter 7 is going to come back. So hopefully we remember it pretty well. Okay, so today we learned about some special quadrilaterals. We did rhombus, rectangle, and square. You should have your property card filled out, and when you come to class, we will do some examples. Thank you, and bye.